Welcome to this edition of Diligent Institute's Inside Today's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about reassessing the board committee structure and risk oversight responsibilities. And joining me is Susan Angele, who is a senior advisor with KPMG's Board Leadership Center and is also the board chair of the 30% Coalition. Welcome back, Susan.
Thank you, TK. It's great to see you again. Good to be here.
So this report that you produced at the beginning of the year called the 2023 Board Agenda was a fascinating read. Okay, so I certainly recommend it to everybody who wants to sort of do a self-check. But the thing I certainly like is, again, the recommendations that you make. So you covered topics like geopolitical and economic risks, human capital challenges, cyber, engaging shareholders, all things that certainly float to the top, on the agenda. But the thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about your section that was called Reassessing Boards, Committee Structure, and Risk Oversight Responsibilities. Because obviously I feel that that's sort of the foundation, a foundational responsibility of the board, and sort of sets the foundation to cover some of the rest of these things, certainly the risk of these things that we're discussing. So that's why I picked this to discuss today. And I'm hoping that you can sort of do just a short recap of sort of the challenges in this space. And then we'll talk about some of the great performance checks that boards should consider. But let's first talk about the environment itself.
So as we looked at it, first of all, no matter what the source of the risk, there's potential impacts that are really multifaceted. So every source of risk, whether it's the economy or what have you, can affect the company's financial status. It can also affect the company's operations. In some instances, it can cause regulatory or compliance risks. Talent risk is also part of it. And then reputational risk, which sometimes is forgotten, is very, very important to companies, particularly in these days of transparency. And if we look at the sources of these risks, it's a lot of what you said, the economic uncertainty and the economic challenges were intense when we wrote this back in December. They're even more intense now as we look into what's going to happen to the economy in the future. Geopolitical shifts, polarization. We've got China and what that means for global trade, the ongoing war from Russia's invasion of Ukraine and what that means with respect to all kinds of issues. And then, we've got other countries as well, but we've also got the U.S. And the political polarization and levels of uncertainty that are just tremendous. So those are some. Technology is another area. Cyber risk is something we've known about and been trying to get our arms around for a very long time. On top of that, we've now got this new thing called generative AI. And so getting our arms around what that means from a risk perspective. Obviously, with all of these, it's also from an opportunity perspective. But because for this discussion, we're focusing on risk, to really get our arms around that from a risk perspective. And then just, more broadly, data governance. Climate change is another risk. We're seeing the effect on physical facilities from the extreme weather patterns now. And then obviously with the SEC's climate change regulation, which is expected to be out sometime in the fall at this point, there will be regulatory and compliance risks as companies prepare for that. Also, the reputational risks are enormous. And with all of this, the stakeholders are just expecting levels of transparency that we're still getting used to. And it's not only about transparency, it's we want to know what you believe in, and we also want to know what you're doing. And so we are seeing that as a pressure as well.
So what I really liked about the report when you were discussing all those things is, you ask, how the committees align with these risks, and, they're not singular sometimes to a specific committee. And how do you address that? Is there a need for another committee when there's a critical area that's important to that company's business? And so, and we both know that what makes this even more unique is the fact that no business is the same, that there isn't one size that fits all. Yeah, we have these three committees, that sort of get mandated, but, you've seen a plethora of other committees being formed by companies. And this report sort of looks at, sort of asks you, are you aligned, and what's happening, which I thought was very appropriate and sort of interesting, which what made it an interesting read for board members. So the other thing that this report does is it offers sort of suggestions of how to do a self-analysis check, on some of these performance issues and stuff. And so, and then you offer, again, suggestions to that, to at least have a discussion, if not stronger consideration. So talk about, in this space of the risk oversight and the committee alignment, talk about some of the suggestions that you make, if you would.
Sure, happy to. And as you said, every board is different, every company is different. And so what I'm going to say is, to be taken with a grain of salt for everyone, because each company has to think, sort of what does this mean in the context of my specific company at this particular point in time. But collectively in our group, in the Board Leadership Center, we talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of board members during the course of a year. And so these are some of the things that we've talked to boards about. And one really starts with looking at what is the current state of the committees. A lot of times that focuses on the audit committee, because we see in a lot of companies, the audit committee is the kitchen trunk drawer. It's where everything goes when there's a risk, and it doesn't neatly fall into the remit of a different committee. And that can be a problem because, number one, it's a workload issue. The main thrust of the audit committee, financial reporting and oversight of internal controls over financial reporting, is becoming more and more complex. And so we want to make sure that the audit committee has time and energy to focus on that. But we also want to make sure that the skill sets that are needed are going to be present in that committee. So, for example, if you've got a risk that's perhaps more forward-looking, it may not belong in the audit committee. It may belong where there's a group of board members that spend more time on forward-looking topics. If you've got a technology-related issue, a lot of audit committees do handle cyber risk, but query whether that's the right thing. And whether they have the right people on that committee. I've heard of other boards where cyber is totally in an unexpected place. I heard one board member say it was in the Nom-Gov committee, and that was simply because a member of that committee happened to be the person on the board who knew the most about cyber. So it's really looking first at, does the existing committee have the time and the skill set to handle these risks, and then saying, okay, so do we want to establish other committees? The question of a risk committee comes up frequently, although it comes up in conversation, frankly, more frequently than I've seen it come up in practice. Obviously, financial services companies have risk committees, but outside of that, we're only seeing in, our latest data is about 4% of the Russell 3000 companies outside of financial services. So not a lot. But companies are looking at technology committees, they're looking at ESG committees or sustainability committees, and other types of committees that would cover risk. So it's really important to look at, do we have the right committees and should we configure them differently? And then it's a matter of understanding this concept that risks are interconnected and avoiding silos. And that's as true at the management level as it is at the board level, but really trying to make sure that there's communication across committees. A lot of boards will have people allocated so that there's a committee that has members of other committees that are covering affiliated risks. And so there's constant communication and coordination. And those are really some of the things that work best that we've seen as we've spoken to boards.
Well, it certainly is interesting when you have, committees that, again, a risk, so there are overlaps. I happen to be a fan of the risk committee concept, particularly where you take a member of each of the other committees and have them serve on the committee so there's good communication around. But like you said, every company's different, every company's talent is different, and you have to sort of organize that to make sure that that's the way that works for you. So Susan, we have about a minute left. Is there anything else that you might want to touch on relative to this topic that you might suggest that the boards have discussions on?
Well, I think the most important thing, since we've been talking about risk, is to really focus on the opportunity side of each of these risks as well. And in the interest of time, I won't go to any of the specifics, but to really, find that right balance. So it's opportunity as well as risk. And then just finally, we do, of course, have a number of other areas that we've looked at on the 2023 agenda piece. At some point in the next month or two, we're going to be doing a kind of mid-year look at it. So that's something to be coming. And I would just, urge board members to really, again, as I've said, think holistically about risks and look to avoid silos.
Yeah, well, again, as I said in the beginning, I was very impressed. I just think it was a wonderful self-analysis check to every board to say, where are we on these questions, relative to that. So I'd recommend that. So you and I have only scratched the surface. So where can people get a copy of the full report with all the suggestions?
Sure. It's on our KPMG Board Leadership Center website.
Well, again, I recommend it. It's a sweet report, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on this important topic, and we'll hope to see you again soon, Susan.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of Diligent Institute's Inside Today's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.